Welcome, this is Jim Lindsay. This is a CIS video. In this video, I'll be talking to you about data and program representation. And this is material that's presented to you in Chapter 2 of your textbook. I hope you're going to enjoy it. It's some foundational type of stuff that as you talk about digital devices, computers, cell phones, all those sorts of things, these are ideas that really I think are foundational to your understanding of how they function. And so that's what we'll be talking about. So let's get started. I'd like to begin by basically asking you to think about maybe your favorite breakfast cereal. And one of my favorites is Lucky Charms. And when I was a kid, one of my favorite things about Lucky Charms was the fact that a lot of the times it would come with a prize. And so what I'd like for you to imagine is basically you've gotten one of your favorite breakfast cereals, and inside of that the prize is a secret decoder ring. And as you can see from the picture there, with this decoder ring you can turn it and basically see a code for different letters. So if you're going to write an encoded message to people in your club or your friends, or you're playing spy or something like that with your cousins or something like that, and you want to write an encoded message that somebody else couldn't read, you would use the decoder ring to basically find the different letters or the different codes to represent the letters that you're wanting to include in your note. So in this example, the letter I would be, it looks like the number 11, and so anytime there's the number 11, someone would say, oh well, that's actually someone on your spy team or in your club could look at their decoder ring and say, oh, he actually means the letter I. So that's, have that in mind, and with that in mind, look at this example of a coding scheme that I want you to think about. These are the letters O, P, S, and T. O, P, S, and T. And to represent those letters, we're going to use two digits, 0 and 1. And we have two placeholders basically. It could be 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, or 1, 1. But in each of these cases, that's going to represent the letter that's just to the left of it. So with that in mind, I'd like for you to take a look at this right here. And please pause this video and try and decode these different words. These are different words written using this particular coding scheme. So please pause the video and give yourself like 30 seconds to try and figure it out. Okay, welcome back. Hopefully you have given yourself some time to figure out what these are. I'll show you the answers to these encoded words here. They are, ta-da, what you see right there. And just to go through one of those, like the letter or the word post right there, 0, 1 is P, 0, 0 is O, 1, 0 is an S, and 1, 1 is a T, and so that's the word post. And so as you go through that, that's how you would get those four different words. The reason I wanted to bring that up to you is because your computer does the same exact thing. Every time you turn on your computer and have it do something, it's doing this. It's doing the same exact exercise that you just went through to figure out these four words. When we say a computer is a digital device, what that means is we're taking things like letters and pictures and video, and we're encoding those, or we're representing the letters, pictures, and video with numbers. Specifically, we're representing them with zeros and ones. And so that's what makes it a digital device. We're talking about digits, zeros and ones specifically. So that's why I wanted you to run through this. And now I want to show you how your computer does that for text and pictures and video. How does it actually digitize things? How does it take them and turn them into ones and zeros? And it's an interesting process. It's not real. We'll get through it pretty quickly, but having an understanding of this will make you, I think, a better user. Okay, let's begin by basically explaining how your computer actually represents a 1 or a 0. Well, in your computer, in the processor, or in the RAM, or in the on hard drives or on CDs. Basically, it's representing a 1 or a 0, and it's doing that through an on or an off, or an on or an off state. And so the reasons that computers use the binary numbering system, or this 0-1 system, to represent data is because from an engineering standpoint, it makes a whole lot of sense. The ways that the first computers did this digitization, made the ones or the zeros, was through something called a vacuum tube, which is kind of like a light bulb. And the light bulb was either on or the light bulb was off, or the vacuum tube was on or off. And so by doing that, by having that on or off state, you could then start to do things as 1 or 0 or 0 or 1 and so on. And so with today's computers, we have circuits inside of our processors, and they're very, very small. There are literally billions of them on a single processor. Something the size of your fingernail on your pinky contains billions of processors, and each of those little circuits can be either open or closed, or off or on. And so if it's an open circuit, then it's off, and if it's a closed circuit, then it represents it's on, and it represents a 1. So, and likewise on things like a traditional hard drive, platter-based hard drive, there are little chunks of metal coated to the surface of that platter that can have a positive or negative charge, and a positive charge would represent a 1, whereas a negative would represent a 0. So through this 1 or 0, positive, negative charge, or open or closed circuit, your computer that can then start to use something called an encoding scheme to represent text and pictures and video. And the encoding scheme that we started this whole presentation with was the 4 letters that we got off of the secret decoder ring from our Lucky Charms box. And so let's look at text and pictures and video and see how those things would be encoded. Let's first look at text, and there are three encoding schemes that I want you to be aware of. There's one called ASCII, which is shown for you right there. There's another one called EBCDIC, which is it's an old system. Both of these are old, but I believe this one was developed by IBM and was proprietary. This one was much more widespread and is still in use today. This one I think is still in use today, probably on specific systems, but ASCII for sure is like the the most widely accepted and used system. And there's a third system I want you to be aware of called Unicode. And because the world has gotten smaller, basically because there are so many more countries that have technology now, we have gone to Unicode just basically out of necessity. I'm going to flip back to that previous slide here. ASCII was developed back when computers were pretty much developed, and they were in English-speaking countries. And with ASCII, basically you had the ability to represent 255 characters. And so by the time you include all the numbers, 0 through 9, and then uppercase letters and lowercase letters, and things like plus signs and exclamation points and pound signs and things like that, you basically run out of characters. And so by the time technology got to around the world, you have like all these different kind of characters from other languages that didn't fit within ASCII because it could only hold 255. And so what Unicode does is it basically just takes ASCII and where ASCII represents a character with 8 bits here, it takes that and makes it uses more bits to represent a character. So we have on orders of magnitude many more storage options, and so we can represent Cyrillic characters and hiragana and katakana and Arabic characters and all sorts of different characters from all these different languages, in addition to just the English letters. Now let's take a quick look at this picture that you see in front of you. Basically it's just the people that created ASCII, or this American Standard Code for Information and Interchange. They said, hey, we want the number 0 to be represented by this code. We want the number 1 to be represented by this code, and number 2 in this code. And it was kind of, I guess, arbitrary, but by doing that, and by everybody using the same encoding scheme, all the computer manufacturers and all the software authors basically agreeing to use this same standard for encoding, you could then start to send programs and equipment and stuff to all over the place, and they work together well because everybody used the same standard encoding system. And that's the beauty of ASCII or EBCDIC or Unicode. Everybody's using the same encoding to represent that particular number or character in the computer system. And so that's how we can take letters like A, B, C, D and represent those through ones or zeros. And that's how your computer does that. Okay, so now let's look at pictures. A picture on a computer screen is basically made up of pixels. And you see a picture right here. You have a guy with the sunglasses and the earbud, and he looks like he's yelling or screaming right here. If you were to zoom in real closely to this picture, if you were to take this picture and then just blow it up really big, what you'd find it's made up of is a bunch of little squares, and each one of these squares is called a pixel, and that's short for picture element. And so even though when we look at this one, at this smaller inset picture here, it looks really crisp and clear, it's also made up of just these squares. All right, so that's how it works. Now I want to show you basically, with this whole concept of a pixel, basically every picture that you see on the screen of a computer, or on a monitor is made up of pictures. Let's look at the next idea, which is basically something called resolution, and that's where it's the measure of pictures, measure or number of pixels that are present on a screen. If you would just sort of bear with me for a second, we're going to work our way from left to right with these pictures right here. Each one of these squares represents something a little bit different. In this leftmost box, basically that's a single pixel. That's one box. You can see it's 1 by 1, and it's this sort of like a sky blue color right here. When you go to the one to the next, just to the right of it, this is a box that has a resolution of 4. Basically, there are 4 pixels in there. See, there are 2 columns and 2 rows right there. And so if you take the column times the row, that gives you the resolution. So with this has a resolution of 4, and you see that there's like a sky blue, kind of some gray in here, a dark blue, and it's going to keep increasing as it goes to the right. So we have 5 columns, 5 rows, 10 columns, 10 rows, 20 columns by 20 rows, and so on. By the time you get to the far right, where it's 100 columns, 100 rows, it's still made up of pixels. It's still individual squares of a single color, but because they're so small, it looks like a nice crisp letter R on the far right, whereas over here it's sort of blurry, and you get into this one and you can't even tell what it is at all. And so when we talk about pictures, your pictures on a computer screen are basically made up of pixels, and the number of pixels present on a screen is the resolution. Now, what happens when you take a picture with a cell phone or a digital camera is basically there's a light sensor inside of that device, and it just does, as it makes that snapshot, it captures how much light is present at the time on each individual pixel, and then represents it with an appropriate color, and then you get something like this right here. So if you have a really, let's say you went to grandma's house and grandma has a really old digital camera, and you took a picture and it's kind of grainy, and what's going on with that camera is its light sensor has a lot lower resolution, and we measure with your digital camera, we basically measure that in megapixels, and so with those really old cameras, or like your older, or really old cell phones and like iPhone 4s and things like that, they don't take as good of a picture as like your new ones, like your iPhone 6s and things like that, which have just higher resolution, more megapixels, and you get that better look there. But what's happening is you take the picture, the light sensor inside is being exposed to the light, and bam, it gets that snapshot of basically how much light is present and what color on each individual pixel, and then it creates that picture for you. Now, you may have noticed if you have picture files on your computer that picture files can be very, very large. And the reason for that is basically there can be several reasons for that, but the more color that you have present in a picture, the larger that picture is going to be. So for example, if you had these 3 pictures that are displayed on the screen for you right here, they're only using 16 possible colors in this example right here. And so to represent that pixel right there, you would just need like those 4 bits right there to represent that. Whereas if you come down to the bottom one, where it's a much richer and robust color palette down here, you look at all of those bits which are required to represent just that one little square in that picture. That makes this image file much larger. And so the robustness or the richness of your picture, that the amount of colors that are present, that can make it a really big file, and so on. So these are some things. That's how we take pictures and we represent those. When you scan a picture, it does the same exact thing. You put a scanner on let's say the scanning bed of like a flatbed scanner, and the light comes over there and basically captures, just like your digital camera would, what colors are present at each particular pixel, and then it represents it through ones or zeros on that computer's hard drive or in its RAM. So that's the process for encoding pictures. Okay, next let's look at audio, because audio is pretty cool. I think just about everybody these days likes to listen to music on their phone or their iPod or some sort of maybe an MP3 player or something like that. It could be dedicated just for music. But how do you take a sound and convert it to digits? How do you get it to ones and zeros if it's someone singing a beautiful song? Well, that's accomplished through something called sampling. And we're not talking about the sampling like you may have heard, like there's lots of great songs out there where they take like one little snippet of one song and include it in another song, and that's referred to as sampling. We're not talking about that. What we're talking about is as somebody sings or as someone plays an instrument or speaks, basically they're sending out sound waves, and through sampling you're recording those sound waves at a fixed interval. And so just imagine there's a beat going here, and every time the beat claps here, I'm clapping my hands, every time I clap it's recording a little snapshot of whatever my voice is. And if you did that enough times, you're going to get, this is basically like bass down here, treble right here, mid-range sort of stuff. And as you record those different treble, mid-range, and bass tones at a regular interval, you're going to be able to get measurements, right? And so this sampled little bit of sound, you're going to have measurements for those. You can turn those into numbers, and so we can numerically, basically through this ones and zeros, we can represent all of these values. Now, if you do that often enough, and computers are great at this because computers can do the same task over and over again very quickly, they can record, they can sample, basically record a song or a voice or an instrument, and then be able to play back that number, that sequence of numbers back for you over something like speakers or earphones. And to you and me, it sounds like the person who sang it is sitting right there next to you. How often does this sampling have to occur? Well, it has to happen a lot. And so to give you an idea of that, if you get a CD, let's say you went to Mellow Matt's here in Bowling Green, and you bought a CD of one of your favorite artists. Well, that audio CD, for every second of sound, there were 44,000 samplings that took place. I mean, like, wow, that's a lot. And that's why, think about how much data that is. If you're doing 44,000 samples per second, and then you have like an hour-long album or CD that you're listening to, that's a tremendous amount of data. And that's why only so much stuff will fit on a CD or a DVD because basically it runs out of room. That's a lot of data to be saving onto a storage medium. Now, one reason that cell phones don't sound nearly as good as things like audio CDs is because the sampling rate is so much lower. You'll see there's like 8,000 samples per second for a cell phone versus 44,000 for something that's record quality. And so that's how we get audio or sound turned into ones and zeros that can be stored on a phone or a laptop or a desktop computer and then played back, and it sounds like we're next to the original artist. Okay, well now let's talk about video, because video, and at this point it becomes really easy because video is just basically the combination of images and sound. Now, as you watch a movie, and I have a picture for you here. This is Adobe's Premiere Pro software that's used to do nonlinear video editing. And so you would use a program like this to basically put together, a TV show or a movie or a commercial, something like that. That can be done with this kind of software. And each different second of video that you watch is basically just a collection of still pictures. And they're, again, basically it's sampling. It's going out there, and instead of you're just sampling the sound, your video camera is basically sampling, just getting a whole bunch of still pictures of what happened as you run across the stage or as you tell a joke or whatever. So we've got this lady right here, as she has some dialogue or says something to the crowd, there are going to be several hundred pictures of her to fill up just a couple of seconds of video. And so that combination of all those still pictures, those frames, is synced up with the audio file that goes with it. Down here in this program, you'll see the green items down here. These are the audio files that go with this particular program that they're putting together, that they're editing. So that's how we get digital video. And again, this is all just converted into ones and zeros. The digitized pictures, the digitized audio is put into ones and zeros, and then it's stored on our computers or our DVD devices, our phones, and then we can watch it, and we can watch a TV show or watch Netflix or whatever. So that's the digitization of video. Okay, we've got one more type of digitization that I want to mention for you, and that's basically the representation of software instructions. If your computer is going to, we buy computers because we want software. Nobody buys a computer because they want a processor and a system unit to sit on their desk and not do anything. We buy computers because we want a browser, or we want email, or we want Excel, or we want video editing software or something. And so each of those programs, in order to function, it consists of code or sets of instructions or lines of instructions, and each of those instructions get converted into ones and zeros that are stored on the computer. Those lines of instructions are basically to be understood by the processor. They have to be converted into something called machine language, and your text talks about machine language and how when people write programs, they don't write software anymore in machine language, thank God. What we do is we use like modern kind of language, and we can tell it to do this or do that, and we can use all sorts of human-friendly commands, and then we have interpreters and compilers which will convert those words that we write into this machine language for us, and the computer can process it for us. But even commands that that the programs on our machines want to run, those get converted into ones or zeros, and that it mentions machine language. So I wanted to bring that to your attention. Okay, a couple of closing thoughts here. And the first closing thought for you is basically your computer uses the binary number system, and I've already told you why that's the case. Basically because we can have an on or off state, through magnetism or through an open or closed circuit. That's real easy for us to do engineering wise with our hardware to So that's why we use the binary numbering system on our computers. But even though we're using the binary number system, we can also, you can store any number that you want on your computer. And what happens is, let's say you had the number 239 that you wanted to store in a binary number system. It just has to be converted from the decimal numbering system to the binary number system. And that's really not a big deal, and you certainly don't, I'm not going to make you learn how to do that. I have in the past, and I'm not going to make you guys learn that. But the way that what happens is this: in the decimal numbering system, when you look at this, as you guys look at that number, you say, "Oh, that's 7,216." I know what that means. There's, there are 6 ones, there's 110, there's 2 hundreds, and there's 7,000s. So that's the 7,216. In the binary numbering system, it does the same exact thing, but because they're using just 2 digits instead of 10, it has just different number places. So instead of being ones, tens, hundreds, and thousands, it has 1s, 2s, 4s, 8s, 16, 32, and so on. So what happens when you put a number in your computer, like let's say your computer, you were doing a computer program and it asks you to input a number. Let's say it's a travel expense report. Okay, so you put the number. I went to a hotel and it cost $175 a night for the hotel. So you enter $175. Well, that 175 is going to be converted to a binary number by going through just converting, how many ones are there, how many 2s are there, how many 4s, how many 8s, how many 16s, and it converts your 175 to an appropriate number. So that's the, you can take any decimal number and represent it with a binary number. And I want to make sure that that is pointed out for you. Okay, and our closing thought is basically this. There are some terms here that I want to make sure you're comfortable with. And sometimes I cover this as the very first point, but I felt like today I wanted to cover it as the last point. When we are putting data into a computer, if we're talking about a single 0 or 1 in storage, it's called a bit. When you take 8 bits and put them together, that becomes a byte. So there's 1 bit, 8 bits together becomes a byte, and then these are abbreviations for terms that I'm sure you have heard over your lifetime. You have kilobytes, megabytes, gigabytes, terabytes, petabytes, exabytes, zettabytes, and yottabytes, and these are different measures of bytes. And so where does this become important? Well, this becomes important when you start to do things like buy a computer. Well, I'm going to get a computer and it has a hard drive that is 1 terabyte large. Well, what does that mean? Well, what that means that there, a terabyte is right here. There are 1 trillion bytes that you could store on that computer's hard drive. So these abbreviations and then the accompanying sizes that goes with those, I want you to be familiar with those. It's presented to you in your textbook. And again, the difference between a bit and a byte. A bit is a single, it's a binary digit. That's what bit is short for. Take binary and digit, smush it together, and you get the word bit. So a single binary digit, 0, 1 is is that thing right there. And you get 8 of those, that gives you a byte. And it's also called a word. A byte is also called a word in some systems. So that's the material I wanted to talk to you about with data representation and program representation. I hope that it's been informative. Thank you for your time and attention.